You decide to go for a little walk, a hike through the woods. But an hour into your woodsy adventure, you're not walking anymore. You're running, because your life depends on it. Welcome back to Unexplained Encounters. I'm your host, Darkness Prevails, and you should follow me on X at Dark Prevails, where I've been blindingly angry about the new Devil May Cry Netflix show. Today's episode is filled with scary hiking stories featuring hungry creatures, ghostly encounters in Belgium, and peculiar things that are on the ground or low to it. Enjoy. If you want me to read your story on the show, send it to me at darkstories.org. Pre-order my new and upcoming book, Creepy Campfire Stories, on Amazon, or use the link in the description. It's a beautiful hardcover collection of scary stories that are perfect to tell around the campfire. Your friends will be deathly impressed. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, be sure to follow and review the show to help us reach more people that need a good scare. Now, let's begin. Big Enough to Eat Vultures. From Before You Know It. I was in 7th grade when our science teacher, Mr. Johnston, yes, there's a T in that name, announced we'd be taking a field trip to the mountains to study birds. We'd been going through a unit on ecology, and he thought it would be a good idea to have us observe real wildlife instead of just flipping through textbooks. At the time, I was about 12 or 13, and although I loved birds well enough, I wasn't really an outdoorsy kid. I spent most of my free time at home playing computer games or reading fantasy novels, so the idea of hiking around in thick woods wasn't exactly my number one choice. Still, I'd never been on a proper mountain hike, and I remember being sort of excited to try it out. When the day of the field trip rolled around, our class piled into a school bus first thing in the morning. It was late spring, so the weather was pleasant. Crisp air with bits of sunshine peeking through the clouds that would later clear up into a bright sky. The mountains were only about an hour's drive from our school, somewhere near the edge of the Appalachian region, and the bus ride was filled with typical middle school chatter. Most of us brought backpacks with water bottles, snacks, and the required tools. A small notebook and a pencil to jot down observations of at least 10 different bird species. Mr. Johnston's instructions were clear. Find 10 birds, note their color, shape, behavior, and any calls they make. Then when we get back to school, we'll compare them with a field guide to figure out which birds we'd seen. I remember sitting next to my friend Carmer on the ride there. He was flipping through a pamphlet Mr. Johnston had handed out, which had pictures of common birds in the region. That included blue jays, cardinals, robins, woodpeckers. My other close friend, Sean, was behind us, leaning over the seat and talking about how he hoped we'd see a hawk or maybe even a falcon. I was just hoping I'd catch sight of something interesting enough to write down. I didn't want to go back empty-handed. We arrived at a small parking lot near one of the trailheads. Mr. Johnston and the other chaperones divided us into groups of 3 and reminded us of the 2 big rules. First, stay on the main loop trail, and second, don't leave your group for any reason. That second rule was aimed at the troublemakers in the class, but it did apply to all of us. Carmer, Sean, and I were able to stay together as a group, luckily enough. We'd always been a trio, actually. Neighbors who ended up in the same classes, so it made sense. Mr. Johnston gave us a bit of direction about which route to follow. The main loop trail wound around the base of a large mountain slope. They told us we wouldn't be going anywhere steep, mostly just a wide, fairly even path, so we could walk without too much worry. The path was surrounded by thick trees, and we could hear the occasional bird call. For a bunch of kids who mostly lived indoors, it was pretty exciting. I was actually enjoying myself more than I thought I would. It felt like a whole nother world compared to my small suburban neighborhood. We started out by just slowly walking along the trail, listening for birds. Every so often, we'd spot a robin hopping near a bush, or a pair of cardinals fluttering between branches. I would scribble down notes in my little notebook. Red bird with crest, distinct chirp. Or small brown bird, quick flight. We weren't sure which species was which yet, but that's kind of the point, right? Sean had the idea to find the biggest tree we could find and sit underneath it, hoping we'd have a good vantage point for spotting bigger birds. We knew there were supposed to be hawks or maybe even the occasional eagle in the region, and he wanted a wide open area of the canopy to look up into. After walking a bit deeper along the trail loop, we spotted a huge oak towering over all the others. Its trunk was thick with these deep ridges in the bark, and the roots were partially exposed, weaving in and out of the dirt. We stopped right there and Sean said, "That's gotta be the biggest one so far." Then Carmer said, "Yeah, that's huge. We might get a better angle if we sit under it. Could see those hawks you want to see so bad." I agreed, so we stepped off to the side of the trail. It wasn't like we were wandering into unknown territory. The tree was still close to the path. We sat down on the mossy ground, using the trunk of the tree as a backrest. The sun was coming through the leaves and creating these little moving patches of light around us. Sean started to scan the canopy with this small pair of binoculars he had borrowed from his dad. Carmer was flipping through the pamphlet again, reading out loud about different hawks, red-tailed hawks and Cooper's hawks and stuff like that. "Think we'll see a bald eagle?" I remember Carmer asking, half joking because we knew that was probably unlikely. But it was fun to imagine. Sean laughed. "That'd be sick. They're huge, you know, like over 6-foot wingspan. If we see one, I'm definitely filming it on my phone." He wasn't supposed to have his phone right now, but okay. Meanwhile, I kept my pencil ready, in case we spotted something worth noting. We chatted about random stuff for a while, mostly video games we'd been playing. I tried to talk to them about my fantasy novels I'd read lately, but they didn't seem to care too much. All in all, it was typical kid stuff, though it felt cooler, because instead of sitting in class, we were in the middle of the woods doing a field trip. It was shaping up to be a good day. And then we heard a strange call from above. It sounded like a hiss or a chirp at the same time. It was loud enough that all three of us shut up immediately. I thought it was some sort of bird we'd never heard before. Maybe it was one of the hawks we wanted to see. But it had a weird rasping undertone to it. Sean adjusted his binoculars upward. "Did you hear that? Where'd it come from?" he whispered, not wanting to scare anything away. We looked up at the branches overhead. The tree had a very thick canopy, so it was a bit tricky to see anything clearly. But I did spot this huge shape up high. A large, dark mass that wasn't shaped like any nest I'd ever seen. It looked a bit like a bundle of furry bark or maybe a clump of leaves that was swaying in the breeze. But as I stared, it looked oddly symmetrical. Definitely didn't blend in the way leaves or moss might. Carmer was the first to say something about it. "What is that? A hawk's nest made of fur?" Sean squinted through his binoculars. "It's not a nest, it looks fuzzy or something. Maybe a cluster of caterpillars or a raccoon that got stuck. That's weird." I tried looking too, but I only had my eyes, and it was way far up. And whatever it was so still that for a moment I thought maybe it was part of the tree. But then I recalled that weird hissing sound. I had never heard of any raccoon or anything else just staying completely motionless like that, especially with a bunch of noisy kids sitting right under it. We were coming up with guesses then. Some sort of weird insect colony. A big wasp nest covered in leaves. Could be an optical illusion of bark. We didn't feel comfortable climbing up to check, obviously, and we weren't about to do that even if we could. "Let's just keep watching," Sean said. "Whatever it is, maybe it'll move eventually." We sat there for several minutes, occasionally hearing bird calls in the distance. A couple of chickadees flew overhead and we noted them down. Then a cardinal hopped onto a low branch to our left, which Carmer quickly wrote into his own notebook. But we kept glancing up at that fuzzy shape, hoping it would move so we'd have some sort of explanation. I remember my arms having some goosebumps, even though the weather was warm that day. Out of nowhere, this big turkey vulture glided in and landed on a branch not too far from that black mass. My friends and I got a good look at the bird. Dark feathers, bald red head, exactly like the pictures we'd seen online. Vultures were quite common in mountainous areas, and seeing one that close was actually pretty cool. Sean was excited. He whispered, "Yes, a turkey vulture. That's definitely going on my list. They're kinda gross, but they're huge birds." Carmer turned to me and started to say something about the vulture's wingspan, but then we both froze. I happened to glance up at the black mass again, and it had moved. It was so quick that for a second, I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it or if it was real. My eyes kept adjusting, trying to understand what I'd seen. The vulture, perched on that branch, started to flutter its wings as it sensed something. Before we could even react, that black mass rushed forward like a blur. It covered the distance from wherever it was perched in the blink of an eye. The next few seconds are seared into my memory. The black shape grabbed the vulture, and I heard the worst noise I'd ever heard. This sharp squeal combined with a low hiss. This mass, which was definitely covered in thick, dark fur, latched onto the vulture with multiple spindly limbs. It was so fast, but I caught a glimpse of these huge fangs or mandibles. It clamped down on the vulture's body, and there was this horrifying wet sound as it pulled the bird close and bit into it. Carmer let out a yell immediately, and Sean backed up so fast he nearly tripped over a tree root. I think I screamed too, just from the pure shock of it, because as the creature adjusted its grip, I could see it more clearly. It looked like a giant spider, the size of a huge dog, maybe bigger than a Saint Bernard. It had a bulbous abdomen and thick, hairy legs braced around the branch. Its eyes were dark or maybe too small for me to make out, but the fangs were huge, glistening with something. And it was eating the vulture right in front of us, or at least piercing its body. I couldn't even comprehend how a spider like that could exist. You'd think it was impossible, but there it was. The vulture tried to flap its wings, but the creature held on, pulling it closer. I only saw a little bit of blood, or it could have been some other fluid, trickling from the poor bird. But the real horror was that slurping sound. I think it was drinking the vulture's innards. That was all I needed to see and hear before my stomach turned. I dropped my notebook and the three of us bolted away from the tree. We didn't care about making too much noise then. We tore down the trail, hearts pounding, legs moving so fast. I remember hearing Carmer panting behind me, and Sean was shouting something like, "Go, go, go!" We sprinted until we almost ran right into one of the chaperones, who was guiding another group of students. We basically collapsed right in front of them, out of breath, crying. Of course, the chaperone asked what happened. At first, we could barely speak, but eventually, Sean blurted out something about giant spider and it ate a vulture. I was still shaking. The other kids in the group looked at us like we were insane. The chaperone's eyes went wide for a second, then she tried to calm us down, saying that couldn't be right. We probably just saw a large bird attacking a smaller bird. But Carmer was adamant, describing the fur, the legs, and the fangs. We begged the chaperone not to go look for it, insisting we should all go back to the ranger station or at least to the parking lot. It turned into a bit of a commotion with the rest of the class. Mr. Johnston was called over, and we tried to explain to him what we'd seen. A few of the kids were starting to make jokes too, talking about movies with giant spiders. That one movie, Eight-Legged Freaks, was mentioned. But I could tell by the way my friends and I were trembling that what we saw was real, or at least very real to us. After a lot of back and forth, one of the park rangers who was on duty around that area decided to walk up the trail to check if there was a bear or some sort of predator that needed to be dealt with. But we refused to go back there with him. We waited in the parking lot along with Mr. Johnston and the others. I recall sitting on a wooden bench with Sean and Carmer, all of us quiet. My mind was a mess. I felt guilty for leaving my notebook behind, but no way was I going back for it. That horrifying image of the spider sinking its teeth into the vulture's body was stuck in my head. We must have sat there for half an hour before the ranger came back down. He said he saw no sign of anything unusual. There was no blood, no giant spider, no dead vulture. Just some scattered feathers near a large tree, which he explained could be from any bird that got snagged by a hawk or other predator. He tried to assure us that we'd probably just witnessed a brief moment of nature taking its course. Could have been a bobcat for all he knew, something that we easily misinterpreted. But we were so convinced about what we'd seen that nothing really comforted us. Even the bus ride back was quiet. Most of the class just thought we were stirring up drama for the sake of it. At one point later on, I remember hearing someone saying that we tried to ruin it so that the field trip was canceled and we had to go back early. I wouldn't do that. But there were a couple of kids who believed us, especially the ones who saw how upset we were. The teachers mostly chalked it up to middle schoolers mixing up an animal encounter with a wild fantasy. After that day, Mr. Johnston never brought it up in class. But he did say something like, we shouldn't get ourselves worked up during field trips because it ruins it for the rest of the class, which made me feel even more guilty. For the rest of the semester, I couldn't look at the diagrams of insects or arachnids in the biology textbook without feeling queasy. For a long time, I got some sort of arachnophobia, checking corners in my room at home for anything eight-legged, even though I knew that thing wasn't just gonna pop up out of nowhere. It sort of changed the way I felt about going outside and about spiders. But to this day, we never did find out exactly what it was. I think it's funny nowadays. Little boy goes out on a trip to find birds, but finds the biggest spider he's ever seen. The Beast of the Falls of Cuyahoga, from Leeble. I grew up about 10 minutes from the park boundary of Cuyahoga, and getting out there in the fresh air has always helped me clear my head. I've heard this in a lot of your stories before, but I mean it. I don't frighten easily. I'm a practical guy, and I'm used to nature being nature, so I know the risks. But this happened on a particular autumn hike, and it really rattled me. That day, the sky was pale, and it made the autumn colors pop, which was why it was such a perfect day to go. Bright reds and oranges lined the path leading all the way toward the waterfalls. I brought my dog Scooter with me for some company. Scooter's a 7-year-old Heinz 57 that I rescued as a puppy. He's usually quite calm, doesn't even bark at squirrels or chipmunks. He struts down the trail like he owns the place, too. I call him my perfect hiking buddy because he keeps pace. He doesn't tug on the leash much and generally listens to my commands. We headed out in the early afternoon. I remember the air smelled like damp leaves and faint earthiness, exactly the kind of crisp scent that signals real autumn. The trail at Cuyahoga Falls was in good shape that day. The ground was mostly dry, despite some recent rain. You could hear the distant roar of water even from the road, and I was looking forward to seeing the falls at a higher flow than usual. The air was just chilly enough to make me bring a light jacket, but not so cold that I'd be uncomfortable if I stood still. The path started off wide, lined by trees that had begun shedding their leaves. Some of the branches overhead were nearly bare, others were still full of color. Scooter was trotting along beside me, occasionally stopping to sniff at a fallen leaf or the base of a tree. We were making good time, too, so I decided we could take a little detour to a rocky overlook, a place I'd visited once before. It wasn't an official part of the trail, just a short side path that led to a big rock ledge where you can peek out at the falls from an angle above the main viewpoint. By the time we reached the overlook, I could clearly hear the cascading water. The view was amazing. Scooter and I stood there for a while. He was panting, and I was just watching. It felt cozy. Nobody else around but us, and the falling water made a good white noise. Kinda wanted to take a nap. Eventually, we continued on to find a spot to sit for a quick snack. The path got narrower as we approached a particularly rocky stretch, which took us closer to the water. Somewhere around this midpoint, Scooter did something he's never done before on a hike. He let out a low and menacing growl. It stopped me right in my tracks. Scooter is not the type to growl at nothing. I looked over and he was all tensed up too. He seemed to be looking at a cluster of ferns and mossy stones near the base of the waterfall. He saw a deer or something, I thought. I knelt down beside him, patted his shoulder, and tried to see exactly what he was fixated on. But the ferns weren't moving, and I hadn't seen any animals darting away. The only movement came from the occasional swirl of water mist drifting through the air. I asked him, "What is it, buddy?" He let out a tiny whine that I felt more than I heard. His ears were pinned back in an alert position, and he took a little step forward, testing the ground as if he were about to pounce. That's when I noticed something near the edge of the waterfall itself. It stood just beyond the vantage point we were at, in a space where the water curved around a rocky ledge. For a moment, I couldn't make sense of the shape. Just a dark silhouette, obscured by the spraying water. But it was kind of human-sized. But its outline didn't match a person. Not really. I couldn't see any real details. Just a form that was tall enough, maybe with arms or something resembling arms. It was perfectly still, too. I wondered if maybe it was a strange stump or a trick of the light. I kept watching it, and soon I realized it wasn't static after all. There was the faintest shift in its posture, like it was aware of us. That's when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I've encountered plenty of animals out in the woods, foxes and coyotes and all that. None of it ever made me feel uneasy, but this shape was giving off this unsettling vibe. It was like my instincts were begging me to understand that something was not right here. Scooter clearly felt the same way, like he knew something I didn't, and was telling me, "Come on, stupid human, we need to go home." His growling became more insistent, and he backed up, bumping into my leg. "Hello over there," I called out. I wondered if a person in hiking gear would come out. Could be it was someone just standing there watching the waterfall. But the figure didn't wave, didn't call back, didn't move in any obvious way. Instead, it remained at the edge of the falls, just intently focused on us, or I assumed such. I took a few cautious steps forward. The terrain was slippery there, with wet stones and a thin layer of fallen leaves. I had to be very careful where I placed my feet. Scooter let out a sharp bark, startling me. "Hey, it's okay," I tried to reassure him, even though my heart was thudding against my ribcage. I managed to get maybe 8 or 10 feet closer, close enough that I could see the spray from the falls swirling around the figure. It was shaped like a person after all, one that was wearing something dark or had a dark complexion, or heck, even fur. Honestly, it was hard to be sure. What I do know is that it seemed to be standing on a rock ledge that jutted out dangerously close to the water. No normal or sane person would just stand there without arms out for balance or fear of slipping in. Then, something happened that still sends a chill through me when I think about it. The figure shifted, an abrupt turn, as though glancing over its shoulder. But there was no discernible face that I could make out. The motion was so smooth but too quick, and it seemed in that moment to acknowledge me. Before I could get a better look, it sort of melted backward into the mist of the falls. I can't describe it any better than that. It was like it stepped or disappeared behind the curtain of spray, leaving me and Scooter alone on the rocky outcrop. I was stunned. Scooter was terrified, and there was tension in the air. I took another few steps toward the falls, ignoring that voice in my head begging me to turn back. I peered through the mist, trying to spot any glimpse of the shape, praying that its face wouldn't just pop out from behind a rock and scare me to death. But all I saw was a tumble of water crashing down onto the stones. I yelled out once more, "Hello?" I saw a reflection in the pool just off to the side. The pool wasn't large, just a little section of calmer water near the main waterfall rushing past. I caught sight of these two glowing points. Looked a lot like eyes reflecting light in a way that reminded me of an animal's eyes caught in a flashlight beam. But this was daytime, and there wasn't any reason for an odd reflection to appear right there in the water. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, but it felt distinctly otherworldly. The reflection vanished the moment I blinked, so it's really anyone's guess as to what I actually saw. By then, Scooter was pawing at my ankles, urging me to back away. Finally, I listened to him. My gut said we weren't going to find any answers by pressing forward. I lingered for just a moment, looking around the area. My heart was still pounding, but finally beginning to slow down. Eventually, we headed back up the trail. Scooter was all too eager to leave. By then, his tail had tucked slightly. For a while, I kept glancing over my shoulder, making sure we weren't followed or being watched. But it was just us. We didn't see another soul on that path, until we made it back to the road. There, I spotted a couple unloading their car, presumably heading out for an afternoon hike. Scooter began to relax. He loves people. And I realized my whole body had been tense up till now. I thought about warning them, but I really wasn't sure what to say. "Yo, I just saw this dark figure near the waterfall." They would probably be like, "Okay, weirdo, keep away from us." So instead, I kept quiet. I just gave them a nod and went back to my vehicle. Now, I've gone back to that trail several times before and have never had a similar experience. I don't know what it was, and you can tell me any sort of excuse, but I'm still very sure that what I saw was real, that it was some sort of living thing. Whether it was a hiker or some strange creature, I can't say for sure. But be careful out there if you ever go to Cuyahoga, because I'm pretty sure there's something around the waterfalls that watches people. Dirt Face from ClairyStories. Don't know if it's weird or not, but my habit is disappearing into this little patch of woods behind our neighborhood. It's only a 5-minute walk from my front door to this old path that nobody else seems to bother with, which is basically the dream when you're an introverted teenager like me. I'll just pop in my earbuds, kick on some music, or maybe a random podcast if I'm feeling fancy, and stroll around until I'm ready to head home. A lot of my friends think I'm nuts for wandering around out there by myself, but it's not like I ever see anyone else, so it feels pretty safe. That's why I didn't think twice when I went out on a random Tuesday afternoon. I had an annoying day at school that day. 2 pop quizzes, a pep rally I couldn't care less about. So I wanted to clear my head. I had my backpack over my shoulder, my phone in my hoodie pocket. I was streaming music through my earbuds. I was halfway through a playlist when I decided to veer a little off the usual path, just to see if there were any interesting mushrooms or cool flowers. Random stuff to distract me from school drama that I was thinking about. I was walking at a decent pace when my foot hit something that didn't feel like the usual soft dirt or crunchy leaves. It was kind of squishy, almost like a fruit that was going bad, or maybe a sponge. It was so gross under my sneaker that I literally jumped back. The moment I lifted my foot, my heart started to race because it felt alive. I mean, not moving or anything, but it felt like I stepped on a body part. I ripped out my earbuds and looked down. I was trying to figure out what sort of weird fungus I'd stepped on, or maybe a dead animal. When I looked, I instantly knew it wasn't that. And the dirt, almost perfectly formed, was the shape of a human face. The eyes were closed, The mouth was barely parted, and even a perfect nose, like someone had sculpted a hyper-realistic face in the ground, with the color and texture matching the surrounding dirt. It's funny, but it reminded me of that scene from The Hunger Games, where Peeta paints his face to look like a rock, but in this case it was flat on the ground and colored like the dirt. Even more bizarre was that my footprint was still visible on it, sort of pressed right over the cheek. Except instead of the rest of the dirt where my sneaker print flattened it, it looked like the face bounced back, like it had actual human flesh elasticity to it. I was just standing there with my mouth hanging open. This had to be, I thought, some sort of weird art project. But I walk out here all the time and I've never seen anyone else here. And also, who would sculpt a perfect human face in the dirt? I could see individual contours, minute details and imperfections you would find on a human face. I decided to try to touch it, because apparently I make dumb decisions when I'm scared or confused. I poked the cheek with my finger, expecting it to feel like dirt or crumble like mud. I screamed when it was warm and just felt like skin. It was fleshy like actual skin or maybe a layer of warm clay. Whatever it was, it definitely wasn't just regular dirt. And the second I poked it, I swear the eyelids twitched. Maybe I imagined that part, because I was so freaked out at the time, but I'm telling you, it looked like it flinched. I screamed so loud that even with my earbuds half in, it was the loudest thing I'd ever heard come out of my mouth. The hair on my arms stood up, and I just bolted. I was stumbling over branches, leaves, my own feet. My backpack bounced around, and the music in my earbuds was still playing some upbeat pop song, which made the whole situation even creepier. I stopped listening to that song for like a month afterward, because it reminded me of that moment. When I finally got home, I was drenched in sweat. I felt like a total maniac. My mom asked if everything was okay, and I blurted out, "Face in the dirt! Face in the dirt!" That's obviously not the most coherent statement, so it took some explaining before she got the gist of the story. That I thought I found something like a buried person or a weird phenomenon behind the houses. She told me I probably imagined it or that I stepped on an animal carcass and freaked myself out. But I was dead serious, and once she saw how pale I looked, she agreed to come check it out with me the next day. She wanted some more daylight, because she's practical like that. So the next day we head out there, Mom walking right beside me, leading the way with my chest all tight. The woods felt different, like I was being watched, and if there were faces in the dirt, then maybe I was. I kept telling myself it was going to be there still, some bizarre imprint, something that I could show her that could prove that I'm not crazy. Except, of course, it was gone. The spot was just normal earth, maybe a little disturbed, but definitely no face. No warmth either. It was chilly, in fact, like the rest of the dirt around the area. We even dug around a bit with a small gardening trowel we brought, but we found nothing underneath except rocks and roots. No suspicious lumps or anything. My mom kept poking fun at me after that. "Oh, it's okay. Maybe you saw some weird arrangement of leaves or something, you psycho." I rolled my eyes, kind of relieved honestly. If it was still there, it would have solidified that I saw something very, very odd. But now that it was gone, maybe it wasn't real, even though I remember it so vividly. This was only a few weeks ago, actually, as of writing this. I still take my walks around there, but I look at the ground more frequently. Because I swear, if I step on another weird earth face, I'm gonna flip my lid. Stories from a Belgian hiker. I'm from Belgium. I've been hiking in the woods here since I was a boy. My father would take me through the Ardennes and tell stories of Frankish knights and ancient battles as we walked. These woods have been a constant in my life, except for a few moments. What I'm about to share with you occurred over 3 years of hiking. I've never written about these experiences before. I'm not superstitious by nature. In fact, I work as an engineer in Brussels. But I simply cannot explain what happened on these 3 occasions. My girlfriend, Amelie, was with me for 2 of these incidents. She's even more skeptical than I am, if you can believe it. A research scientist who demands empirical evidence for everything, including when I forget to take out the trash. The fact that she's witnessed these events as well is the only reason I don't think I'm losing my marbles. The first story I'll call the crossing at TNA Bremont. It was 2018. I was hiking alone that day on a trail near TNA Bremont, not far from the French border. Emilie had a conference that weekend, so I'd gone by myself on a day hike I'd done many times before. It's a beautiful area, dense forests, small meadows, and rocky outcroppings. I started early, around 7, planning to complete the 18-kilometer loop before sunset. The weather was good that day too. By midday, I'd made good progress and stopped in a small clearing to eat some lunch. As I finished my food, the songbirds around me suddenly went silent. In the forest, you can assume that when that happens, a predator is close. A fox, a wildcat, maybe even you. But considering they hadn't gone silent until just then, I assumed it wasn't my doing. I stood up and looked around. Didn't see anything weird. But still the silence was making me uneasy. Forests aren't supposed to be truly quiet. There's always a constant background noise of bugs and birds and leaves. I packed up, deciding to continue onto the trail. 10 minutes later, I came to a stream crossing, a narrow brook with stepping stones that I'd crossed a dozen times before at least. But something felt strange. The air felt charged, like before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. As I approached the crossing, I saw a figure standing on the other side of the stream. Someone that was clearly not a person or a normal person, because they were completely motionless, like not even breathing. They appeared to be wearing old-fashioned clothes, something like a long coat or robe, dark in color. I couldn't make out their face clearly. It seemed to be in shadow despite the midday sun. Just in case it was an awkwardly still person, I raised a hand and called out a greeting. Bonjour! The figure didn't even move, let alone say anything back. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. Something about this figure wasn't right, beyond just the stillness. They were slightly too tall, too thin and lanky. Didn't look like someone who wanted to be out here or belonged out here. I decided to cross anyway. There was no other path unless I wanted to backtrack several kilometers. I stepped onto the first stone, then the second. When I looked up again, the figure was no longer there. Now trust me, they could not have walked away in that time frame, not without me hearing it or seeing it. It was more like they simply ceased to exist. One blink and then the next, just gone. I froze right there. What happened next is difficult to describe. As I completed my crossing after eventually unfreezing myself, the forest around me changed. Not in a dramatic way, but everything looked slightly different. The light had a bluish quality it hadn't had before. The temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. I continued hiking, now very well creeped out. But nothing else unusual happened until I'd hiked another kilometer or so. Because that's when the bird sound erupted all at once, returning in an instant. And, as if I walked into a wall of warmth, the temperature instantly rose again. I swear to you, it was like I crossed into an invisible boundary. I checked my phone later, and I was upset to see that, despite maintaining my usual pace, I was 2 hours behind on my hike. 2 hours that I cannot account for. I told no one about the experience for a while. I didn't want my friends or family worrying about my mental health. And seriously, I thought I had a brain tumor or something. How does one lose time and see things and hear things that are just wrong? The second story is called The Lights of La Houppe. This happened in 2019 in the fall, in the forests of La Houppe. This time, Emilie was with me. We planned a weekend hiking trip, staying at a small bed and breakfast in a nearby village. The forests in this region are associated with one of Belgium's most famous folk tales, that of Clude. According to legend, Clude is a malevolent shape-shifting spirit that haunts lonely travelers, especially near the water's edge. He appears in various forms: a winged phantom, a black dog, sometimes even a half-human tree creature. The stories say he lures travelers off their paths, leading them into bogs or dangerous terrain. Emilie and I had laughed about these stories over dinner the night before. She joked that the legends probably started because some drunk farmer got lost in the fog and needed an excuse for his wife. Our hike that day took us through dense forest, following a trail that occasionally ran alongside a series of small ponds. It was late October, and the autumn colors were at their peak. We'd been hiking for about 4 hours when dusk began to fall. We had headlamps, but decided to start heading back. We didn't want to navigate the more difficult sections in the dark. As the light was fading, a mist developed from the forest floor. Not unusual for that time of year, but it grew uncommonly thick, reducing our visibility to maybe 10 meters ahead of us. We stayed close to the path, moving much more slowly, talking a bit louder than normal, as if to make ourselves feel more safe. It was then that we saw the first light. It appeared to our right, maybe 30 meters into the forest. A pale blue-green glow hovering about a meter off the ground. Some kind of bioluminescent fungus, I thought. Never seen anything like that in Belgium, at least not that bright. "What is that?" Emilie whispered, and she grabbed my arm. Before I could even answer, another light appeared to our left, and another ahead of us. Within moments, we were surrounded by perhaps a dozen of these glowing orbs, all roughly the same size and color, all hovering at the same height, too. "They look like lanterns," Emilie said. But they weren't lanterns. These things moved independently, with an almost liquid motion, occasionally pulsing brighter or going dimmer again. They seemed to be closing in too, forming a circle around us. Within a minute, we were back to back, watching these lights get closer to us. Neither of us spoke about running. We didn't know where to run to. The path was now obscured by mist, and the forest was full of unseen hazards. Then, from somewhere in the darkness beyond the lights, came a sound I'll never forget. A kind of rattling hiss like chains being dragged across leaves, followed by the distinct splashing of something heavy moving through water. Though the nearest pond was about 100 meters away. One of the lights suddenly darted forward, stopping perhaps 5 meters from us. In its glow, I could now see that the mist around it seemed to form a vague shape, something that looked eerily like a human, but distorted as if viewed through warped glass. "We need to go," I told Emilie. We began to back away, still facing the lights. They followed but maintained their distance, not letting us break their circle, however. The rattling sound came again, closer this time, and a smell came with it, like stagnant water and rotting vegetables. Emilie was the more practical of us, as I said, and she remembered her phone. She clicked on the flashlight, hoping to drive away whatever creatures or insects were causing these phenomena. When she turned it on, she pointed it toward the nearest light, and something extraordinary happened. The beam of her phone light seemed to physically push against the strange glow, and it shrank back as if in pain. The misty shape around it contorted, and that hissing sound rose to an almost painful pitch. We didn't hesitate. We took the moment to run in the direction we'd been heading. Emilie's phone light carved a path through the now retreating lights. Behind us, the hissing, splashing sounds continued, but they grew fainter as we ran, After about 5 minutes of headlong flight, we burst out of the mist onto a clear section of path. The forest was normal again, no lights and no strange sounds, just the peaceful nighttime woods. Even then, we didn't stop running, not until we made it back to our car. Later, researching what we might have seen, we found references to something called faux follets in local folklore, marsh lights that were said to be the souls of the unquiet dead, or sometimes manifestations of Clwyd himself. The rational explanation would be methane, from decomposing matter, but that wouldn't explain their movement, the shapes in the mist, or that awful sound. Whatever we encountered that night, it wasn't mentioned in any scientific journal Emilie could find. My last story for today is called The Empty Trail. This happened in the summer of 2020, again with Emilie. After our experience the previous autumn, we'd been more cautious about our hikes, staying on popular trails and avoiding going out after dusk. But as time passed without incident, we gained our confidence back, for better or for worse. One hike, we chose a well-traveled route in the Sognen Forest, just outside Brussels. This ancient beech forest is beautiful, but much less remote than our previous hiking locations. On weekends, you'd typically encounter dozens of other hikers or cyclists and families enjoying the woods. It was a Sunday, and as expected, the main paths were busy with people. Seeking a bit more solitude, we took a less traveled side trail that I knew eventually reconnected with the main loop. This smaller path was still marked and maintained, just less popular due to its steeper sections. We'd been walking for perhaps 20 minutes when I realized I couldn't hear any other hikers anymore. Not unusual for this side path, but there was something else missing too. The distant sounds of the city that normally form a faint background hum in the Sognen Forest. It was just us, the trees, and our footsteps. Is it just me or is it way too quiet? Emilie asked. We continued to walk, and I noticed something weird about the path ahead. Though it was a clear day, the trail seemed to just fade into this hazy distance that shouldn't have been possible in the forest. Sections of the path that should have been visible simply weren't. It was like the trail itself was unspooling before us, existing only a few meters ahead at a time. Then we noticed the trees. The Sognen Forest is famous for its cathedral-like beech trees, with straight trunks and a high canopy. But the trees around us looked different than before. Older, more gnarled, branches lower that created a tunnel-like effect over the path. I didn't recognize these species. That was impossible. I recognized all the native trees in Belgium. We should probably go back, Emilie said. And I agreed. So we turned around, only to find that the path behind us looked just as unfamiliar as the one ahead. The trees were wrong, the quality of light was wrong, and the path itself seemed narrower than ever. We chose to continue in our original direction, reasoning that we'd eventually hit the main trail again. We walked for the longest 40 minutes of my life, but the forest around us kept looking more and more unfamiliar, like we had stepped into a haunted forest from a Hollywood film. Neither of us said it, but we both knew that this wasn't the Sognen Forest anymore. This wasn't anywhere in Belgium that I recognized. We soon came to a clearing that was perfectly circular, as if deliberately formed. And as the two of us stepped into the clearing, a vibration ran through the ground beneath us, and for an instant, I thought I saw something moving between the trees. My hair stood on end, and I felt such primal fear, and Emilie must have felt it too, because without a word, we both turned around and ran for our lives, no longer caring which direction we went. We ran until our lungs burned, following whichever path we could find. Then, from one step to the next, everything changed. We stumbled onto a wide gravel-covered main trail, nearly tackling some cyclists. We were back in the normal, familiar Sonian forest. Beech trees and normal weekend hikers were all over. This last experience may not be as creepy. You could simply say we ran into a part of the forest that we hadn't been to before, got creeped out because we felt lost, and ran like mad people. Sure. But I think it was something more than that. I've spent my life in the forests of Belgium. I've loved them, respected them, thought I knew them. Now I understand there are layers to these ancient woods that I've only glimpsed. Places where the veil between worlds grows thin, where things that should not exist sometimes come through, and unwary hikers might just slip between one Belgium and another. Don't worry, I still do my hiking, and I've yet to come across something like these stories again. We have a forest friend. From Hep and Bep. The night it happened, my sister and I were walking back from our friend Ellie's house. We lived in one of those neighborhoods where the houses were set far apart, with patches of woods between properties. Ellie's place was only about a mile from ours, a walk we were familiar with and not scared of. Usually our parents insisted on driving us after dark, but they were at a dinner party that night, so we didn't have any other choice. And we had stayed at Ellie's longer than planned, binging our favorite shows and losing track of time. When we realized it was almost 10 p.m., we decided to just walk back, rather than call our parents and interrupt their evening. My sister, I'll call her Kate for this story, was 17, 2 years older than me at the time. It was a new moon night, making the woods between properties very dark. We used the flashlights on our phones, but it barely helped because the lights didn't go very far. The temperature had dropped while we were inside and our breath came out in little clouds. By the time we were halfway home, passing through a stretch of trees between the neighborhoods, Kate stopped suddenly. "I heard something," she said. I hadn't heard anything, so I asked, "What'd you hear?" Not sure why I was keeping my voice as low as hers, but I did it anyway. "It sounded like breathing, heavy breathing." We stopped, and we both listened. Now that the sounds of our footsteps died down, I heard it right away. An inhale that was raspy followed by a wheezing exhale. It was coming from somewhere behind us. Just a dog," I said. But it honestly didn't sound like some dog. We picked up the pace. Not quite running, but walking faster than before. The path got thinner, and we had to go single file with Kate in the lead, and I was terrified to be in the rear. The whole way, the breathing followed us. It didn't get closer, thank God, but it didn't fall behind either. Then we heard footsteps. 2 legs, not the 4-beat rhythm of a dog or a deer, but the distinct cadence of something walking upright. Step, drag, as if one of the legs was being pulled along. I held my breath, then looked behind me, sweeping my flashlight around. For a moment, I caught a glimpse of something behind us. What I saw was a tall and thin silhouette. I'd say it was about 30 yards away. The beam only hit it for a moment, but I saw enough to know this wasn't a person and not a dog. Whatever it was extremely thin, bony even, with a canine-like snout on its face and pointed ears. But I couldn't tell if it had any hair at all. It didn't look like it. "Kate," I hissed, grabbing her jacket. "There is something behind us." She looked back too, but whatever I just saw had stepped away into the darkness between the trees. "I don't see anything. You're freaking me out." "I don't mean to, but it was there. I saw it. We need to run." She didn't argue. We then broke into a sprint together. Our house was maybe a quarter-mile away now, just beyond the next stretch of the woods. The breathing behind us grew louder. The footsteps quickened. Step, 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 step. No more dragging now. Whatever it was had started to run too. We burst out of the trees onto our street, gasping for air. There were no cars anywhere, no neighbors in sight. Only us and this thing. Our house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac. The porch light was on. I remember thinking, scared out of my mind, almost there, almost there. We sprinted up our long driveway. The porch was only a few feet away now. Kate made it to the front door first and yanked on the handle. "It's locked," she cried. "Your keys, you have the keys." I had to remind her that she had her own set of spare keys. I turned around then, and for a moment I thought the thing was gone, or maybe it didn't follow us all the way. But then I saw it. At the edge of our driveway where it met the street, I saw it. Something crouched real low to the ground, trying to hide itself in the shadows cast by our neighbor's hedge. But I could see it. Its outline was much more clear now. It was skeletal thin, with these crooked limbs, and a head that was elongated and had a pointed snout. And I knew it was watching us. Why wouldn't it be if it followed us all the way over here? And even worse than that, I could still hear it breathing. This thing thought it was hiding from us, but I could hear it breathing. "Kate, it's right there," I whispered. All I heard as I watched this thing's figure on the ground was her fumbling for the keys for ages before finally she got the door open. I could have tackled her just to get through first. Once inside, we slammed the door shut. Kate locked the door, and we ran over to the living room window, peering out through a crack in the curtains. But in that brief moment, the figure was no longer there. I was relieved, but also horrified. Our parents got home about an hour later. We told them everything, not even leaving out the weird shape details. Dad didn't believe we saw something weird, but was definitely concerned of our safety. He's the kind of guy that, if you say a monster followed you home, he would assume it's a big dog or a bear, then walk outside anyway with a gun. Mom was more inquisitive, asking us questions about what we'd seen exactly. "Some homeless thug," Dad said, "or teenagers being stupid." "I don't think it was a person, Dad," Kate said. "You didn't see it." "Well, I'm looking out there," he said, looking through the window. "It's gone now. But next time, call for a ride. No more walking after dark, okay? I don't want another incident like this or worse." Later that night, around midnight, Dad had to take the trash out before bed. A nightly ritual he never skipped, because Mom gets really teed off if he forgets to. She hates the smell of a full trash can. Mom was already upstairs, and Kate and I were in the kitchen, too wired to go to sleep. I could have fainted when I heard a sharp cry from outside and a thud against the side of the house. We froze, looking at each other, and then we heard Dad's voice. "Let me in, god dang it, open the door!" We ran to the back door. Dad fell inside practically. His face looked shocked or pained or both. I saw a ragged tear in his pajama pants, and his ankle was bleeding. Mom, who was now running down the stairs, called out, "What happened?" "Something bit me," Dad gasped, leaning against the wall now. "I didn't see it at first. It was real low to the ground, hiding beside the trash cans. It lunged at my leg and bit me. When I yelled, it reared up, stood up on two legs. The thing was a foot taller than me when it stood up." Mom helped him to a chair while Kate got the first aid kit. As Mom cleaned the wound, I could see it clearly. A semicircle of deep punctures, like something with a narrow jaw had clamped down on him hard. "We should call the police," Mom said, grabbing her phone. "And tell them what?" Dad replied. "That an animal bit me and ran away? They wouldn't care. And if I told them what I saw, they would think I'm crazy." He insisted it was probably just a big coyote or a feral dog, despite what he'd said about the thing's height. The bite didn't look like a typical dog bite. Dad did end up getting rabies shots to be safe. He even told the doctors it was a stray dog. The wound healed fine, and my dad is okay. But something in him changed after that night. And no, it's not a werewolf thing. He installed motion sensor lights all around the property, bought a better security system, and he established a new family rule that no one violates. No one takes out the trash after dark. No one walks the dog after sunset. No one goes out at night, period. Whatever followed us home that night, I still think it's out there, lying real low to the ground, waiting for someone to walk along. So who would you put your money on in a fight to the death? Giant vulture-eating spider in a tree? Or the skinny flat humanoid dog creature in the suburbs? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Unexplained Encounters. I've been your host, Darkness Prevails. Don't forget to follow me on X at Dark Prevails. Get my new book, Creepy Campfire Stories, on Amazon before it releases, July 8th, 2025. Link in the description. And if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, follow and review Unexplained Encounters. Thank you. Until next time, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.